Down through the years, he had a phrase that he repeated like a personal mantra to hold at bay anyone who pressed him too closely about the meaning of his work or his own intentions. It came from an essay by H.P. Lovecraft, and like Stephen King, a popular manipulator of the occult, in all things that are mysterious, never explain, it said. The edict applies to Kubrick's own work as well, but also even more to himself. From the book by Walker, Taylor, and Rookde called Stanley Kubrick, Director. Generally considered one of the best horror films of all time, Kubrick's adaptation of the Stephen King story The Shining is not lacking in its interpretive creativity on the part of film critics and analysts. Freudian psychoanalysis combined with esoteric speculation generally garners much of the review space, but in my estimation, The Shining is about something much more obvious and yet obscure at the same time. I believe the film adaptation is intended to convey the same message as King's, and that is demonic possession. It's not merely a presentation of the possession of Jack Torrance, played by Jack Nicholson, but of the spectral haunting of America itself, in terms of its dark past in relationship to Native Americans, and much more. Is there something to the idea of America as an ancient Indian burial ground? This is in the background of Stephen King's novel of horror and possession, and the idea of the Overlook Hotel is that it's built on an ancient Indian burial ground. This becomes, of course, the scene for the terrifying paranormal events that occur in Poltergeist as well as The Shining. But I think that what's interesting is that we're asking a question about spiritual forces. Is there a principle or a power of good and evil that lies at the heart of the foundation of America's own ancient past? And I want to add that if you like this analysis, you can get more of the same in my book, Esoteric Hollywood, Sex, Cults, and Symbols in Film, at jaysanalysis.com. Esoteric Hollywood covers the biggest films and the biggest directors with 404 footnotes and 363 pages. Definitely something that you want to check out. Signed copies are available at jaysanalysis.com at the tab. Note as well that the book has, in its first 9 months, over 100 5-star reviews. And it also led to the creation of my TV show with Jay Widener, Hollywood Decoded, available at Gaia TV. In the film, as we'll see, it's indigenous animistic spiritualism that undergirds the narrative, and it manifests as a form of generational curse upon Jack, as we'll see. Initially, the camera perspective appears to fly in from an aerial vantage point, as if we were viewing the scene from the perspective of a disembodied spirit or a demon. From the camera's angle, we can also see the lake, and the reflection suggests an as above, so below motif, where a lonely islet in the midst of vast mountains sits, reflecting the isolation of both nature and the isolation that Jack himself seeks as he flees to the Overlook Hotel to escape family life. Signifying isolation, Jack's desire to be rid of his family is thus conveyed by this natural landscape. The mirrors and reflections that we see here are also prominently displayed throughout the movie. And I think the point of this is that just like Alice in Wonderland, mirrors connote the spiritual realm or another world or the psyche, we're going to be looking into that spiritual realm and into the psyche throughout this film. Hovering over the mountains, the viewer gradually comes to spot Jack winding towards the ominous Overlook Hotel in Colorado. Built in 1907, the site was chosen for its seclusion and scenic beauty, but there's a darker side of this locale. It seems to draw dark forces into its midst as a kind of spiritual vortex. While the hotel is real, we discover that in Jack's mind it begins to take on an otherworldly portal association. Jack has, in fact, chosen this location purposely for his writing. The story will be his next novel. However, the real story is not the novel, but the gruesome reenactment of a spiritual ritual sacrifice that is required for his imagined entrance into this Hall of Fame of the elite, the abode of the beautiful people and the jet set, as the film says. Arriving at the hotel, Jack and his new masters become acquainted. That is, the all-American manager himself, Stuart Ullman, facilitator of horrors, orgies, and abuse. Yes, the interview scene conveys an overtly Americana facade that clues the viewer into the dual symbolism of the film, where the Overlook is both Jack's degenerating psyche and it's a microcosm of the United States. With a friendly, charming veneer, the baby boomer generation has a dark side that is portrayed both figuratively and literally in Jack's brutality at the mystic locale of the Overlook. In this scene, America is not baseball and apple pie, and manager Ullman's JFK-esque appearance masks his own potential to actually be a nefarious character. While surrounded by the icons of Americana, we see flags and paintings of Native American artworks that shows the displacement of the previous civilization. It's worth noting, as Rob Ager has shown in his documentaries, that the Playgirl issue that Jack is seen reading, oddly enough, at a hotel — why is a Playgirl laying out to be read at a hotel — actually deals with incest in that very issue. This is a big key to interpreting the film, because we learn that, of course, later on it is Jack who is incestuously abusing his son, Danny. Now, it's also important to see that the photos in Ullman's office appear to be the same that will conclude the film. Ullman reveals to Jack that the history of the caretakers involves a previous mass murder where cabin fever resulted in an instance of madness and violent outbursts. Danny, we start to learn, has a special talent by which he can actually presage the future, identified in the film's title, The Shining. Critics Walker, Taylor, and Rookde explain, highlighting my point about animism in Native American traditions as follows. Carruthers, played by Dick Halloran, is a great casting success. His talent for shining springs from the animism associated with black culture. But Carruthers' features, ancient and weathered like the Easter Island monument, also lend more gravitas. He's the hero, although he is a sacrificial hero. Jack explains to Ullman that his wife, Wendy, played by Shelley Duvall, is a confirmed ghost story and horror film fanatic. As we see from the imagery in the Torrance apartment, Wendy actually shares an interest in the occult. This includes numerous books on witchcraft, as well as a notorious Catcher in the Rye book associated with several MK Ultra assassins. Because Jack has come to despise his family, he thinks that they are a stumbling block to his supposed greatness, and thus the dark depths of his subconscious will suggest, through the whispers of the demonic, that he could write a real horror story for Wendy and Danny. Following his father's job interview, Danny experiences a supernatural premonition, a seizure, and dissociating blackout, sensing intuitively that the trauma they are destined to undergo in the Overlook Hotel is soon to come. We begin to suspect that Danny has been abused, possibly sexually, as his alternate persona, based around trauma-based mind control, named Tony, lives in Danny's mouth and stomach, we're told. In my opinion, the usage of the inverted stars here on Danny's shirt intensify the reality of the demonic. It was used intentionally because we later discover that Jack has in fact physically and sexually assaulted Danny, resulting in his traumatic break and the mental creation of the multiple Tony. Interestingly, in accounts of indigenous religions and spiritual possessions, there are instances of spirits inhabiting certain areas and regions of the body in just this way. Indeed, as film analyst Rob Ager has correctly elucidated, the abuse appears to be generational, and intergenerational conflict shows in this way Freudian Oedipal envy, that is, Jack resents Danny, and will occupy much of this story. Ager is also correct in his insights concerning the cartoon programming that Danny has apparently received, as Jack will become the big bad wolf at the end, utilizing the Disney and nursery rhyme mantras during his psychosis. This is also why cartoons and cartoon characters are consistently displayed throughout the film, as you see here on the door. Numerous references are made to fairy tales such as Hansel and Gretel, as well as the classical works of mythology in regard to Theseus and the Labyrinth's Minotaur. Fairy tales and mythical references are thus profuse, Ager is also perceptive to connect the old hag in the bathtub, as we see later in the film, to the classic notions of the seductive sea nymph or the siren who transforms into a hag, causing sailors to then crash upon the rocks to their despair and demise. This omen will appear and apply to Jack as he progresses down his path of possession. Looking over the books visible in Wendy's living room, we can see an interest in witchcraft in the books titled The Magic Circle and Mother Goddess. As the counselor learns that Jack dislocated Danny's shoulder in a drunken rage, we begin to wonder, is it maybe Jack who is the witch? Wendy, however, is partly to blame in all this for her naivety and enabling and overlooking the trauma that Jack has caused against Danny and against her better judgment. She tries to convince herself that Jack has changed and believes in his empty promise. Recall as well that the magic circle appeared in Kubrick's film Eyes Wide Shut that we highlighted in my other documentary video. It appears that Danny has arranged also, as we saw previously, the cartoon stickers in his room in a kind of magic ritual circle. Concerning the Minotaur and the film's art direction, critics Walker Taylor and Rookde note, Kubrick often positions Nicholson visually against extremely formal backgrounds. One image frames him in the abstract design of a wall tapestry, a Native American motif. It also resembles a printed circuit. It calls to mind the rigor of programmed information. No deviation is allowed. In another shot, Torrance looms above a model of the garden maze. This maze clearly alludes to the Minotaur myth, in which a monster with the head of a bull and the body of a man was kept in a labyrinth and fed on human flesh, cannibalism, until the hero, Theseus, killed it. It was a legend that had long appealed to Kubrick. The company that made Killer's Kiss 25 years ago before was called Minotaur Productions. In his film, environment is destiny and not its instrument. As the now evidently dysfunctional family journeys to their nightmare abode, Jack posits a macabre topic for discussion: the reality of cannibalism as a drive that is necessary for survival, as he sneers at Danny's awareness of what he saw on television. Jack displays his psychopathic, parasitic side in a glimpse, a premonition of what horrors await. Here, as is crucial to note, and as Ager has shown in his analysis, Jack apparently has homosexual proclivities despite his exterior masculine framework. He is apparently playing a fatherly role, but as he tours the hotel, and as Ullman reveals the secret of the outlook, we learn that it was formerly a getaway for the moneyed elites, for the Hollywood jet set and royalty, all the best people, we're told. Kubrick's dour view of the American aristocracy and the middle class is reflected in their offspring, represented in the film by both Jack and the younger generation in Danny. The hotel is not merely a site for elite orgies or lascivious dalliances, but a representative sacrificial site where the dead are fed upon and feed upon parasitically the fear in living organisms. This theme will also appear in my analysis of Twin Peaks. We also learn in this scene, interestingly, that the Monarch mind control program, which was a real program, is subtly referenced in the film behind the two twins that represent Gemini. Notice also behind the two twins there appears to be some sort of poster that looks like it has a minotaur or bull horns on display. Now, with this Monarch program being referenced, I think that it's fascinating that Kubrick was apparently aware of MKUltra mind control and its experiments done on children. These experiments are actually detailed in certain MKUltra doctors' books, like Programming and Metaprogramming the Human Biocomputer, as well as Kubrick documenting it in his film A Clockwork Orange, which involves operant conditioning through Pavlovian means and methods, as well as drug administration to socially engineer the public. Timidly touring the hotel, Wendy anxiously refers to it as a maze, like the hotel's garden, sprinkling her dialogue with references to cartoon characters and nursery rhymes. Danny is spoken of as lost, signifying both a literal and a figurative sense, looking for his parents. he has been abandoned. His parents, of course, fixate on the landscape, leaving him forgotten in the, quote, game room. Jack rhetorically comments on Danny's playfulness. "Did you get tired of bombing the universe, Danny?" Signifying Danny's representation of youthful American aggression in terms of his generation. The great Enlightenment experiment that sits upon the giant Indian burial ground, the United States, is also being signified here, I think, and Kubrick was very much a critic of Americanism, especially its foreign policy, as we can see in films like Dr. Strangelove, where the absurdity of mutually assured Cold War destruction and the Rand Corporation are lampooned. The Cold War great game was truly a game room of the theater of war, making Kubrick's critique of Western imperialism here appropriate. Danny, we recall, had seen a vision of the murdered twins in the game room, while behind him on the scene is a poster that reads Monarch. Given Danny's representation of both traumatized youth and naive America, Monarch can also be applied to the nation en masse, since, as I propose, the MK-Ultra abominations were really about mass mind control and not primarily about programmed assassins. Kubrick is thus gradually revealing Danny's abuse, trauma, and mind control at the hand of his father, Jack. The Minotaur has a significance in terms of human sacrifice, which is a dark side of the film, as we'll see, in relation to the myth of Theseus. Originally a human sacrifice tale, according to scholar Nigel Davies on the history of this practice, he writes, perhaps the most famous concerns Theseus and the Minotaur. Theseus was already a hero of many tales, including the killing of Procrustes, another slayer of men. Athens paid an annual tribute of 7 youths and 7 maidens to Minos, king of Crete. These he shut up in the labyrinth, where they either lost their way and died of hunger, or were eaten by the Minotaur, half man, half bull. This is the first section of my documentary covering The Shining, the esoteric and occult aspects of the film Decoded. If you want to see the full revelation, subscribe to Jay's Analysis for $4.95 a month or for $60 a year. Or you can get my book, Esoteric Hollywood, Sex, Cults, and Symbols in Film, at my website, signed.